7 minutos ainda?
Isso. Faz a abertura, Sheina, como que vai ser mesmo?
Eu faço a abertura e passo para o Dr. Marco.
Tá. Ele apresenta, ele chama os vídeos.
Isso.
E volta para todos.
Isso, eu me organizei para fazer uma breve frase, apresentar os participantes e chamar o vídeo, tá bom?
Ótimo.
Ótimo, obrigado.
Hello. Let's check if everyone.
Hello.
Hi. Hello, how is everyone?
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Nice to meet you all. I'm Shane. I'm going to introduce the session, and then I'll pass to Dr. Marcus Canavino, the moderator. Just checking if everyone's here. So Ans Vercammen, Emily York's here. Can you turn your video just to hi? Katharine Zywert, Ronan Foley, and Viveka Guzman. Everyone here. Great.
Hello, everyone. Just a brief note. Hi, I'm Antonio Saraiva. Nice to have you all here. Hi, Marco. Sheina, just wanted you to know that because this is the first day where we're learning and we were kind of thrown out of the last session, previous session, without having mentioned the final comments, the closing comments of the day. So after you finish, Marco, I'll still be here, and I'll just say a few housekeeping comments. Okay, so I'll be here on the backstage.
That's great, Antonio.
Have a great talk, a great session, you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Ans, Ronan, Viveka, Emily, and Katharine. Nice to meet you. I am Marco.
Nice to meet you.
Hi.
Hello, nice to meet you guys.
We have 4 minutes to start. In China, remember that's when we make a countdown. It will take about 15 seconds, 20 for everybody get in the room. So you can start saying something, but people will start entering the room. Okay?
So you give the message and then I wait 15 seconds to start. Is that it?
Yeah, you can start saying hello, welcome, something like that.
Okay.
You can see the attendees will change the number depending on the connection of each one. It will take 5 seconds for someone, 10 to 15 to others.
Yeah, for some people from our team that are attending, they said it took even more, like 20 seconds. So I may wait a little bit so they don't see you in the middle of a phrase, for instance. They don't hear you in the middle of a phrase. Just wait a little bit.
Okay. Or we can open before also, like
Okay.
1 minute before.
And Dr. Marco, I'll put the questions at the chat, okay, for you to answer questions for the panelists.
Shaina, I think we will give opportunity to each professor speak a bit. So let's try to give one question to each one of them, okay? And if the audience ask something, we can put and split to the professors, okay?
So I will do a countdown of 5 seconds and we are live, okay? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, we're live.
Good afternoon, everybody. We start in a few seconds.
Não tá bem, meu áudio, Marquinhos? Marquinhos,
Welcome to day 1 of the 2021 Planetary Health Annual Meeting, co-hosted by the University of São Paulo and the Planetary Health Alliance. I'm Shaina Koffler from the University of São Paulo, and I'm very pleased to be introducing the Science Lightning Talks on mental health. 5 abstracts were selected and will be presented as pre-recorded videos. Subsequently, we have the authors live for a questions and answer session. I would like now to introduce our moderator, Dr. Marcos Canavino, from the Faculty of Medicine at the University of São Paulo, who will lead us through the conversation. Thank you very much, Dr. Marco.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody to this amazing lightning talk session, which studies make us reflect on the connections among mental health and environment. In order to take advantage of time, I will briefly present the authors, then we will watch the video, and then we will pass to the question and answer sessions, when we will be able to account with questions from the audience through the chat of Zoom. Therefore, let me introduce at first Dr. Ans Vercammen, PhD, Center for Environmental Policy, Imperial College London, with the work Changing Worlds, Young People's Psychological Responses to Climate Change During COVID-19 and the Impact on Mental Health. Now introducing Emily Ward, Oregon Climate and Health Program Lead, with the work Social Resilience and Climate Change, Findings from Community Listening Sessions. And then Katharine Zywert, PhD candidate, University of Waterloo, with the work Nurturing Health Across Social-Ecological Scales, investigating how therapeutic gardening, care farming, and the soil health movement can improve human and planetary health. Then Ronan Foley, PhD, Associate Professor, Department of Geography, Maynooth University, with the work, The Role of Nature and the Built Environment for Health and Well-Being During COVID-19, a mixed methods analysis from the Green COVID study. And finally, presenting Viveka Guzman, MD, PhD scholar, Division of Population Health, Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, Planetary Health Campus ambassador with the word "Catch the sun coming up, wave it off as it goes down." A qualitative exploration of later life therapeutic landscapes during the first wave of COVID-19 pandemic. Let's start with video now.
Climate change is not just an ecological crisis, but indeed a public health crisis. Yet the mental health impacts of climate change have received comparatively little attention. Our ability to effectively address this looming mental health crisis is impeded by limited scientific evidence, insufficient knowledge about potential interventions, and a lack of engagement at the policy level. With Climate Cares, we aim to tackle all three of these issues. That is, building an empirical evidence base, designing and testing interventions to support vulnerable individuals, and influencing policy and health systems change. Today, we want to share with you the preliminary results from our first research study entitled Changing Worlds, in which we focused on young people as a particularly vulnerable group to the mental health impacts of climate change. The study involved a UK-wide online survey, which was open from August to October 2020, and was focused on 16 to 24-year-olds. We asked them questions about their mental health, their experiences with climate change and with COVID-19, what their hopes and fears for the future were, and their perceived agency in tackling issues such as climate change and COVID-19. There were a few notable observations when we compared young people's perspectives on and their psychological responses to, on the one hand, the pandemic, and on the other hand, climate change. So first, despite the relatively distant effects of climate change for young people in the UK, and the absence of significant interference in their daily lives, overall distress associated with climate change was slightly, but significantly more pronounced. This seemed to be largely driven by greater feelings of guilt and responsibility over the climate crisis than over COVID-19. A sense of loss or grief was more common in response to the pandemic. Secondly, we also found that the stress over the two crises increased among those with moderate to severe anxiety symptoms. But interestingly, for those experiencing not to very mild anxiety, climate change was perceived as a significantly greater source of distress than the pandemic. Young people in our survey felt less agency with regard to climate change. In particular, they indicated that they were less aware of what they could do against climate change and less capable of enacting change. Strikingly, for both crises, young people felt that they lacked control. From this, we may conclude that interventions that focus on developing agency and resilience may be needed in this particular group, and perhaps even more so in those already experiencing symptoms of anxiety. We welcome any questions and comments and are happy to provide further detail on the study in the Q&A session. Thank you for your attention on behalf of the entire Climate Cares team.
Hi there. This is Emily York speaking on social resilience and climate change. When it comes to building resilience and adapting to climate change, there's no doubt that certain hard infrastructure improvements need to be made. Higher levees, deeper wells, air filtration systems. But what about the infrastructure that we cannot see? What about the relationships and connections between people that enable us to innovate and support each other in times of need? A growing body of research indicates that social resilience, including a community's level of social cohesion, social networks, and social capital, are key protective factors enabling a community to effectively prepare, respond, and adapt to climate hazards and other stressors. In 2019, we held 4 listening sessions with different communities across the state of Oregon on this topic. Some of the themes that emerged include the following. Racism and political polarization are barriers to building community resilience. Climate resilience requires that basic needs like food and housing are met. Individual wellness and mental health are connected to a community's overall resilience. And trusting relationships, cultural traditions, and diversity are all important factors. As a governmental agency, we have the greatest responsibility to engage and build trust with communities. Government agencies often see themselves as distinct and separate from communities. However, we're a key part of a community's social networks. This research resulted in recommendations for how government agencies and other organizations with power can act as social capital builders, especially in communities on the front lines of climate change. Governmental agencies can resource community leaders and look for opportunities to share power in public processes. We can build a workforce that reflects the racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity of communities served. We can invest in language interpretation services, promote community storytelling, art, and cultural events, and we can prioritize intercultural communication and facilitation skills. Governmental agencies have a responsibility to build bridges, not just physical bridges over rising waters, but bridges between people and communities. Together, we can expand our publicly funded climate programs to include social resilience strategies and measures as necessary co-benefits of any climate investment.
Hello, my name is Katharine Zywert, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada. I'm going to speak today about part of my PhD research, which investigates initiatives that bring together cultivating the land with health and social care to improve outcomes at the level of human health as well as planetary health. Through a series of semi-structured interviews, I investigated 3 fields of practice: care farming, therapeutic gardening, and the soil health movement. Care farming is an approach to agriculture where farmers invite people who have experienced or are experiencing mental illnesses, long-term disabilities, or addictions onto the farm to become part of the team that helps the farm operate. And what they found is that contributing in this way to the meaningful work that takes place on the farm improves participants' social sense of social connectedness, as well as physical and mental health outcomes. At the same time, it produces a new income stream for small-scale farmers by integrating them into the health system and encourages the adoption of organic farming methods. Therapeutic gardening is a diverse set of practices that leverage the shared work of growing a garden to increase human health, build communities, and restore local ecosystems. And practitioners who work with gardening in this way have found that gardens become a wonderful place for communities to gather, to strengthen their relationships, often across divides, and also to help provide for some of their basic needs. Gardens, of course, can improve food security and also increase access to herbal medicines and traditional medicines that contribute to preventative health. At the same time, they have ecosystem level impacts, things like increasing biodiversity, improving the health of the soil, and cooling the microclimate around the garden. The soil health movement aims to restore the soil's vital planetary function by working with the capacities of self-organizing living systems. Healthy soils help to increase the resilience of the land to climate change and also to the effects of extreme weather. They help to improve the water cycle and can increase resilience to both drought and flooding, for example. And I think this is a fascinating example because it focuses on building the health of the smallest scale, of what D.D. Pershouse calls the microbial workforce that exists within the soil in order to enhance the health of the planet as a whole. So what I found in my research is that these 3 fields of practice that combine cultivating the land with health and social care have significant impacts both for human health and across scales for planetary health as well. And because many of these initiatives come at such a low ecological and economic cost, I would argue that they could become really important cornerstones for post-growth health systems. Thanks very much.
What enables mental health? Many researchers consider that mental health is an outcome that evolves through the life course. Of course, in this scenario, our own physiological factors and genes are quite important, but these in turn are nurtured by the relationships we build with others and multiple elements in our natural and built environment that help us achieve a good level of physical, mental, and social well-being. The term of therapeutic landscapes emerged from the field of health geography, looking at how the characteristics of a given place promote health and well-being. At the very beginning, the framework was used to understand traditional places with healing properties. Think, for example, of Bath in the UK or Lourdes in France. However, quickly the term expanded to include wider blue and green spaces, and today, everyday environments for multiple scales. This includes parks, gardens, and views from home. Today, the therapeutic landscapes framework is used to gain an understanding into how we engage with our environment and what environments enable health and well-being. So what happens then when public health restrictions necessary to contain the spread of a new virus include shelter-in-place orders as well as restrictions of movement? My name is Viveka Guzman, and together with Gabriela Bustamante, Lindsay Kobayashi, and Jessica Finley, we set up to answer the following question. How do older adults in the US engage with nature and outdoor spaces during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic? To answer this question, we utilize data from the COVID-19 coping study, which is a mixed methodological study of adults based in the US who are aged 55 years old or over. From the baseline data of the COVID-19 coping study, we created a qualitative data set of 769 entries related to participants' experience with nature and the outdoors. When analyzing the data, we found three main themes. So the first one was different types of engagement. The second one was rationales for engagement and perceived influence of health and well-being. And the last one was barriers and enablers to access nature and outdoor spaces. So regarding the theme number one, types of engagement, we found that participants engaged for fitness activities, for purposeful projects as gardening or working on the yard, as well as passive activities. This is an example from Emma, who is 71, and she said, the weather has been nice, so I've been able to get outside and walk in my neighborhood. Being able to walk outside has been critical for keeping me physically and mentally active. This is from theme 2, rationale for engagement, related to what were the perceived outcomes of the engagement. There was a lot of talk about managing negative feelings as well as creating positive emotions. So this is from Richard, who is 63, and he said, I've been taking long walks in the woods with my camera, shooting wildlife, birds mostly. That takes my mind off the state of the world right now and the huge loss of life. This is from Carlos, who is 67, related to theme number 3, barriers and enablers. And he said, I'm fortunate to live in a suburban area outside a relatively small town. So it has been easy to get outside while maintaining appropriate distance from other people. I would like you to go home with at least 2 messages. The first one is that natural and built environment elements have been quite important during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the second one is that therapeutic landscapes provide an opportunity to understand our relationships with the environment and identify potential interventions for the future. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Good morning, and the following is a short presentation from our team. My name is Ronan Foley from Maynooth University in Ireland, and our paper is on the role of nature in the built environment for health and well-being during COVID-19, a mixed method analysis from the Green Study. And you have a list there of the participants in the project, and we were a group from Spain, the United Kingdom, and Ireland. The aim of the study was really to think about the pandemic response, and in particular the role of nearby nature. So it was called the Green COVID Survey, and it was a cross-sectional study from Spain, the UK and Ireland with a total respondent number of 3,127. And the aim was to look at the associations and describe them of the relationship between well-being and mental health with characteristics of the immediate, natural and built environments. And this study is focused more specifically on adults in Ireland in the first wave of the pandemic. The actual predictors were built in natural environment characteristics such as housing and nearby green and blue space. And then the health outcome measures used were the Kessler Psychological Distress Tool for mental health and the WHO 5 Wellbeing Index for Wellbeing. Just broadly speaking, to give you some of the broad results, on the right-hand side you got the regression results, and the most significant one were household problems. These were significant in terms of reducing mental health and reducing well-being as well. And examples are listed there over on the left-hand side, such as noisy neighbours, poor insulation, bad spells, so that kind of effect of housing particularly. The broad relationship in terms of regression between quality of view at home and quality of an outdoor space, having an outdoor space at home, were also associated with improvements in mental health and well-being done not significant, and also being in an urban space tended to reduce mental health and well-being. The other key indicator outcomes, I guess, are related to scorings from a range of 0 to 10 around the relationships with green and blue space and the outdoors. So there was a significant score of 8.5 for the perceived contribution of being in, seeing or hearing the outdoors as an enabler in coping with COVID-19. And we also did a kind of a before and during COVID-19 set of questions that asked how important were views of blue and green space people before or during pandemic, and in both cases, those scores increased during the pandemic, i.e. there was a greater appreciation, and they went from 7 to 7.8 for blue space and 7.7 to 8.8 for green space. So just two broad key messages at the end. We would argue that access to nature and appropriate household characteristics have enabled health and have been instrumental in helping people cope with the negative effects of the pandemic, and that's been across the 3 countries. And we also think of the need for investment in green and blue infrastructures that promote equality and are accessible for all, irrespective of age, mobility, capacity, income, and geographical location. Thank you.
Okay, let's start with the questions and answers session. We have some questions from the audience. We have a question to, hello, do you have tools and resources to help manage mental health issues that you can share? I am passionate about advocating for mental health and wellness. It could be to Emily York or Ans Vercammen or other wells which would like to answer.
Hi everyone. I'm happy to answer this. I mean, I don't actually have the answer exactly, but just wanted to share something that we as Climate Cares are doing specifically for young people in the UK. So the next step in our research program is looking at a low intensity intervention using a diary approach. We have developed actually a diary that young people can keep to help them process some of the feelings and the emotions that they're experiencing with respect to climate change in particular. And that will be evaluated as well. So I think this is, I don't have the answer exactly of whether or not that's an effective approach for young people to deal into with feelings associated with climate change and feelings of agency. The idea with that sort of intervention is to try and build that resilience and agency through this diary approach. So I think more to come is really the answer here. I'm happy to pass it on to someone else. Yeah.
That's nice. I would ask you about future interventions. Good, very good. And talk a bit more about your particular interest by young people.
Yeah, I think the evidence is pointing towards this particular group. And when I say young people, so I'm not sure if it was clear from the presentation. So we were at this point in time looking at 16 to 24-year-olds. They are considered to be a group that's at particular risk of sort of adverse mental health outcomes with respect to, in general, in fact, but also with respect to how they're managing the impact of the pandemic, as well as dealing with increased eco-anxiety, solastalgia, those sorts of emotional experiences. And so we felt as one of the groups, obviously they're not the only group who's at risk, but as one of the key groups at risk within the UK, we felt that it was important to start with the young people.
Right, nice, thank you. Emily, would you like to answer also the question?
Yes, thank you. I was just going to sort of build off of
what has already been shared, that I think one of the things we're learning is the power of storytelling and just creating spaces and opportunities for people to share their experiences and listen to each other, and that there's so many ways we can do that, whether it's through a Zoom virtual gathering like this, or there's a lot of different storytelling methods that we're learning about and starting to explore, and seeing how that is a way to really continue the dialogue around community level mental health.
Great. Storytelling is a terrific method to increase connection between people and increase the empathy. I think this idea is terrific, great. Okay, there is a question to Katharine. Fascinated by the intersection of our food and health systems on the production side. Can we speak a little bit more about successful creative examples of this?
Sorry about that. I can certainly respond to that. I wouldn't say that I'm a food expert. I've been studying more the practices of cultivating the land and their effects on mental health, but I would encourage you to look at the soil health principles because I think that they offer really creative and in some ways very intuitive ways of managing food landscapes for producing food, but also very different than conventional agricultural techniques. So things like leaving roots in the soil, minimal disturbance of the soil, so no-till agricultural approaches, always having the soil covered with either a cover crop or some form of kind of organic matter mulch. Like all of these things can actually improve yields and produce more and restore depleted lands, but they're not common. Certainly they're gaining ground, I think, right now, and hopefully will continue to in the future.
Nice, great. There is another question: how to stimulate this connection with nature and benefits for mental health through public policies, especially in developing countries? As in the case of Brazil, we even have problems with security in public parks. Thanks, Karina Pavão, Botucatu. I would like to invite Ronan Foley to answer this question, if possible.
Yeah, I was just about to type an answer to Karina as well. I think it's a really important point, and it's a very good lesson for someone like me from the global north about considering green and blue space in very different parts of the world and how it's used and perceived very differently by different people. So I absolutely agree that in the literature there's a lot of discussion around the positive potential of parks, but equally a recognition that sometimes parks can be dangerous spaces. So there's a lot of research done, for example, on gender, and on women using parks in the dark. So this assumption that a park is always a positive space is wrong, clearly, and one assumes that answer kind of varies from where you come from and the type of space. So there's a complexity to green space that almost like a continuum of them being healthy, safe spaces, or sometimes unhealthy, unsafe places as well. I can't give an answer on that, but I think it's a very good question to raise.
Great, thank you. Now I would like to ask Viveka Guzman. I love the idea of working on landscapes. And I would like to listen a bit more about the description of one of participants. And if you think that this intervention could be applied even to people younger or mid-age.
Yeah, so the population that we included actually were the respondents of the survey. So they were all age over 55, based in different parts of the US. And I think the term really of the therapeutic landscape, it applies to every age.
So there you might have some differences about how people relate to spaces, but actually is something that can apply to every population. And I think that there has been some attempts to make it a little bit more kind of practical in terms of you have the social prescribing interventions, this kind of movement in trying to move from medicalization and treating mental health just as something that needs to be treated with medication to try to put different interventions in place. They're not perfect. They also have some issues, but at least there's that attempt to kind of move into more nature-based solutions for mental health.
Great. I think there is a connection with the idea or with the work from Emily Orr that we can find other types of interventions, not just medical, psychological, but also from social perspectives and environmental perspectives. Nice. We have other questions from the audience. I would like to hear if someone of you was looking to the concept of solastalgia with focus of ecological grief, climate change, and COVID. Thanks. Who could answer? Maybe one of you can answer this question, or is too much specific?
I can say something to this effect.
Great.
Yes, we're particularly interested in this idea of more around sort of eco-anxiety and the question of whether these feelings of anxiety and grief as well, whether they relate to other aspects of pre-existing anxiety, or whether they perhaps exacerbate, and whether crises such as the pandemic and climate change actually exacerbate pre-existing anxiety, or whether that's more a general experience in our case in particular in young people. Interestingly, what we found, and I mentioned this in the presentation, is that we found that feelings of grief were particularly strong with respect to the pandemic for these young people. And I think obviously this is the pandemic so this was in 2020 in the stage where the pandemic in the UK was particularly harrowing. And I think there were lots of feelings of grief and stress around that in these young people. So grief was not so much a feeling that they associated with climate change particularly, and more with the pandemic. But that was also because of a direct comparison that we sort of made between those two crises that people were dealing with at the time. And that is definitely not to say that those feelings of grief and anxiety are not present. Definitely, we found that those were present for young people with respect to climate change as well. And I think that's borne out in the wider literature as well. And I think it's really important to focus on that, especially that is something that we will be working on as part of the sort of diary-based intervention that we were talking about as well.
Thank you. Okay, here we have I think a very good question, because it's for all the authors. How do we ensure these lessons from the pandemic are not forgotten afterwards? And I think this is a big question. How do you think that those findings and interventions could be really implemented, applied to the reality, and not forgotten outside? Who would you like to answer? Ronan, okay.
Yeah, and I'm sure everyone will have something to say about this, but I guess the obvious one is kind of policy interventions and to make sure that some of that evidence actually slips into planning, urban planning, rural planning, into policy around environmental management and care. I think in our case, because we were looking at sort of the value of green and blue infrastructure, it's actually to make sure that that is particularly recognized as something that's valuable, and there's a tendency to not concretely value those kind of assets in society. And actually one of the really big questions I think in that area is, how do you give some sort of a monetary or even a health type value to green and blue space because it's seen as kind of intangible. So it's hard sometimes convince policymakers without sort of hard numbers, hard figures, hard cash, if you like, in some ways. So I think that's quite important in terms of you know, converting your evidence into some sort of meaningful policy, and also doing so in a way. And the other thing I would say is, for me, is really important is that idea of improvements. If what we do is saying we need more green and blue space, to make sure that that green and blue space is well managed and is made available to all. So it's spread around cities, around countries, and all groups in society get a chance to get some benefit from it.
Great. Other comments? Emily, Viveka, Katharine, would you like to comment?
I can go ahead. I think definitely what Ronan mentioned there about the policies is a big kind of thing that we need to do. And I think the other thing is the kind of interdisciplinary work that has been coming up with the pandemic. I think that's something that will be really important to continue. And if we are able to continue that, I think there will be some continuity to the kind of COVID findings and how we push them forward. I think when you kind of sit in a conference like this and see that there is momentum, there is interest, it's just like how you kind of build on those things. And yeah, if the policy people are not that driven, then you have to kind of work with your group to remind them constantly, like, there is this thing. And I think the other thing is not let it go back as it was. For example, here in Ireland, there were a few improvements for its own public spaces, right? So there was some infrastructure put in place. So make it that doesn't go back to the way it used to be. So always kind of advancing a little bit more, I think.
Thanks. Great. Okay, we have one more question, two more questions. Are there rural-urban disparities in people's mental health reactions to climate change? Are there rural-urban disparities in people's mental health reactions to climate change? Who would you like to answer this question? Katharine, could you answer this question?
No, I wouldn't say that that's within my area.
Okay.
I posted an answer to that question, and I'm not sure if that's actually coming up, but I can address it very briefly. We had that question as well for our particular study, and we did do a comparison between our respondents that were based in sort of rural areas in the UK versus the large towns or big cities. We found no differences in their feelings or emotions that they expressed or sort of mental health outcomes. But I have to say that our sample of young residents in rural areas was very small. And so we probably very much underpowered to make any statements really that would hold up at this stage. And the reason why we looked at it is because we had that same question. It wasn't one of the major aims of the study. So it was sort of I guess a post hoc comparison. And I think going forward, it would be really interesting to look at that, because I think that, as did the person who asked the question, I think there are reasons to hypothesize that there might be differences. So I think that would be an important thing for us as well to look at going forward.
Great, thanks. We have another question. Hello, everyone. I would like to know more about racism as a barrier to mental health resilience.
Yeah, I can just share that was a theme that came up in the community listening sessions that we did around the state of Oregon in the United States. We met with different cultural communities and just listened to how the communities defined resilience, what that looked like, and sort of learning what they saw as the barriers or challenges to building community resilience, and exploring some of these topics around community connectedness or social resilience that we've been calling it, and how that plays into being resilient to climate hazards. And racism was a theme that came up in, I think, all listening sessions as something identified as a barrier. And there were different stories told about how racism created polarization, created sort of, fear within communities. There were some stories, and actually this is, I think, reflected in the literature when you look at social cohesion, that generally we think of social cohesion as being a protective factor. But if a community is very cohesive, but only to those who fit a certain identity and belonging, and then are not connected or bridged to other communities that also are maybe have their own cohesion, then it can be isolating and polarizing, and there can be maybe some sort of resilience within a community that has that cohesion, but then when something happens at a bigger scale, if those communities don't have the bridges to work together and also to link to those decision makers that are going to make those policy changes that we're talking about, then what we basically heard through these stories is that is a barrier to building greater climate resilience.
Perfect. So cohesion is very good, but considering an inclusive society, okay? Okay, because the time we will have to finish, we wouldn't have more questions, but I will pass now to Professor Antonio to ending the session, and I thank all the authors and the audience. It's a pleasure to moderate it.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you all for your very interesting work. Certainly very important, especially nowadays with all that's happening. So, and interestingly enough, this conversation following the first day, of course, it was on purpose, the first day in which we talked about values and happiness. So you're dealing with the same subject. So for those which are here still with us, we still have around 200 people here with us. Thank you, you all for joining for this first day of the 2021 annual meeting. I just remember you that we have 4,600 registrants from 120 countries. It's a huge number and high diversity of people from all around. We had an extraordinary day today, one that certainly will require more reflection over the several days, especially as we learn more throughout these next few days. Happily, all sessions have been recorded, so we'll be able to watch them again and again in the days to come. During this first day, we discussed foundational values for planetary health, with the goal of exploring, recognizing, and acknowledging that we need the framework of planetary health values to make change for the great transition. These common values need to draw upon indigenous wisdom and traditional ecological knowledge, also draw upon world religions and faith traditions, and understand how to better our relationships with ourselves, with each other, and with the great world, nature around us. The good news is that there's a wealth of knowledge and examples for us to draw upon, as we learned from our first two panels. Our last panel, that interview on happiness, gave us a lot of hope that we can also flourish and find true happiness by improving justice and equity issues, taking care of nature and of each other. When we find common values, meaning, and purpose, we can flourish and we can create better societal structures within which we live. And we heard that these deep social connections can happen and thrive across diverse communities, cultures, and geographies. So very good conversation for us to keep in mind for tomorrow's discussion. And a few comments that I'd like to bring here as well in terms of housekeeping. Remember that there are many side events and festival events going on today and tomorrow before the main program, so check them out. Just remember as well that the Planetary Health Alliance has launched the individual membership program, so we invite you all to join and become part of our community. You can do that by going to the booth, Hilo booth, and joining using Hilo. Hilo is a great place also for you to continue the conversation during this week and later on. So visit the Hilo booth to register. I would like also to mention that Planetary Health has launched the new Regional Hub initiative. So make sure you connect with your fellows from your country, your region, to be part of that community. Just as the same, you can find that Regional Hub initiative on Hilo. I would also ask you to participate on the Planetary Health São Paulo Declaration on Planetary Health. We really want to hear from you so that your voice, your knowledge, your opinions are considered. Again, visit the São Paulo Declaration booth to join and send your comments. And you can also see the other booths of the other sponsors for more opportunities. So these were my points. Thank you all for being here. Not only the participants of this wonderful lightning talk session, but all the audience which is still here with us. So see you at least tomorrow morning here in Brazil. Otherwise in one of the other silent festival events. Thank you so much and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.